glided past the valet lane without question. Instead, a uniformed officer stepped into her path, his badge glinting under the streetlights, expression unreadable but rigid. "Hold it right there," he said, voice low but sharp. "You can't enter here." Monique blinked, disbelief freezing her chest. "Excuse me." Her tone sharpened, a blade of authority she had earned over decades. The officer shifted, blocking the car's path, nodding toward the empty lobby. "This is private access. You don't belong here." A laugh escaped her, bitter and incredulous. "You're blocking the CEO of this company. You know who I am." He didn't flinch. He didn't move. His silence pressed against her like a wall. Around them, the plaza hummed with oblivious pedestrians and distant sirens, indifferent witnesses to her humiliation. Rain dripped from her hood, streaking across the polished leather interior, mirroring the anger burning inside. Monique's pulse spiked. Her jaw tightened. The officer's eyes held a smug certainty, as if her success had no weight here. And then, in a voice colder than the rain, he said, "Rules are rules. Nobody's above them." The wipers swept her fury across the windshield. Her phone vibrated on the seat beside her, a live feed from a security camera, capturing every second of this affront. She pressed record, heart hammering. One step. One word. One exposure away from shattering the illusion of control this man wielded. The officer's gaze locked onto hers. Neither moved. The night held its breath. Rain pattered steadily against the windshield. Monique Harris sat in her black sedan, the streetlights glinting off the hood, casting fractured reflections across her eyes. Harris Global's glass and steel headquarters loomed ahead, a beacon she had built with decades of sweat and strategy. Tonight, nothing should have stopped her. But a figure emerged. A uniformed officer, badge catching the neon glare, planted himself squarely in the valet lane. Arms crossed. Body rigid. Face unreadable. "Hold it right there," he said, voice sharp, a low rasp cutting through the rain. Monique blinked, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Excuse me." "You can't enter here," he said, stepping closer. She laughed, incredulous. "Do you know who I am?" He shook his head, not a flicker of recognition. "Rules are rules. Nobody's above them." Her pulse raced. Anger coiled in her chest. "I'm the CEO of this company. I built this place. You are blocking me." The officer's lips tightened. He gestured vaguely toward the lobby. "Private access. Not for you." Her mind raced through protocols, security codes, the absurdity of the situation. Each word he spoke dripped with subtle authority, reinforced by the uniform, by the badge, by the silent compliance of the world around him. She realized he didn't see her as the owner. He saw her skin, not her resume. Monique reached for her phone. The camera activated, lens catching his stance, the rain, her reflection in the polished leather interior. "Then let's document this," she muttered, fingers hovering over the record button. A passerby glanced briefly, disinterested. Another couple murmured under umbrellas, eyes sliding away. The plaza was indifferent, habituated to the power games she now faced. "Rules are rules," he repeated, voice colder this time. "Move along." Monique exhaled, steadying herself. Her voice, sharp as steel, cut through the drizzle. "Then you'll answer for this. Every second." The officer's jaw clenched. Neither moved. Rain dripped from her hood, streaked across the dashboard, mirrored the tension building inside. Her mind ticked through possibilities: legal, social, professional leverage. Every instinct screamed caution, yet fury demanded confrontation. Finally, she pressed record. The lens captured his rigid stance, the sneer buried in formal decorum, the absurdity of power misapplied. "Step aside," she said, voice low and commanding, a blade of authority that had carved boardrooms and markets alike. He didn't. The night stretched taut, every shadow a witness. One small slip, one word, one act of courage or exposure could tip the balance. Monique felt the weight of decades of accomplishment reduced to this standoff on wet asphalt, a collision of authority and bias. The rain fell harder, blurring reflections. The officer's gaze locked onto hers. The world narrowed to the distance between them, the tension unbroken, the injustice palpable. One step. One word. One recorded moment away from a reckoning. Monique's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she pushed past the sliding glass doors. The lobby smelled of polished stone and sanitized air, a sterile monument to corporate efficiency. Her phone still recording, she kept the officer's rigid figure in her peripheral vision through the glass doors, a silent accusation embedded in the reflection. "Good evening, said a young receptionist. Voice polite but measured, eyes flicking at Monique's dark suit and wet hood. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Monique said, setting her phone down briefly. "I need access to my office. Now." The receptionist's fingers hovered over the keyboard. I'm not sure. Security was instructed to." "Security?" Monique interrupted, tone sharp. Her voice carried the weight of a CEO, but also the simmering tension of humiliation freshly endured. "I am security. I built this company. Who instructed you?" The young woman hesitated. Sir, Officer Miller, at the gate." She gestured vaguely toward the front, as if pointing at a ghost. "He said, only authorized visitors could enter." Monique's jaw tightened. Authorized visitors. The euphemism drilled like nails. She glanced at the lobby cameras above, imagining the footage of the officer's audacious blockade. Every subtle gesture, every coded microaggression, now documented. "I am not a visitor," Monique said, voice controlled but electric. "I am the CEO. And you will let me through." A security guard appeared from a side entrance, oversized raincoat dripping water. He stopped, nodding at the receptionist, then at Monique. "There's been a situation," he said carefully, eyes avoiding hers. "Situation." Monique repeated, her patience thinning. "I want answers. Now." Dialogue flowed like a current through the lobby. The receptionist whispered to the guard. The guard spoke to the building manager. Monique's presence fractured the usual routine, leaving colleagues and bystanders caught between protocol and bias. From a glass partition, a junior executive peeked, whispering into his phone, reporting the unusual scene to someone higher up. Murmurs spread quickly. "You need to calm down, Ms. Harris," said the building manager, finally emerging. His tone was soft, almost apologetic, but the subtext was clear. Authority here was separate from rank. It adhered to old hierarchies and invisible prejudices. Security is following procedure. We just need to. "No," Monique interrupted, voice slicing through the ambient hum of the lobby. "You will not delay me. I am documenting everything. I expect cooperation." Her phone buzzed, receiving an alert. Someone on the security feed had noticed the recording, whispering already spreading through internal chat groups. Monique's pulse quickened. She felt the simultaneous satisfaction of leverage and frustration at the inertia of systems designed to uphold her exclusion. A junior HR representative approached cautiously. "Ms. Harris, perhaps we can resolve this quietly. Officer Miller he's just doing his job." "His job is enforcing exclusion," Monique said sharply. Her eyes met the HR rep's, unflinching. "I'm the owner of this company. What is happening here is not procedure. It is discrimination." The receptionist cleared her throat, voice shaking. I didn't know." "I don't want excuses," Monique snapped. "I want access." Silence followed. A low murmur of tension filled the air, broken only by the distant sound of rain against the glass and the faint hum of the lobby's ventilation. Colleagues watched from the periphery, some sympathetic, some hesitant, some uncomfortable with witnessing authority challenged. The building manager finally sighed. "Fine. I'll escort you to your office. But please, remain calm. Security is on high alert, and there may be consequences." Monique's lips pressed into a thin line. Consequences. The term dripped with implication. She, the CEO, could still be constrained by those who wielded minor authority and held bias in place of judgment. Walking through the corridors, Monique's phone continued to capture whispers of dialogue. Security guards exchanging coded glances, administrative staff murmuring approvals, murmurs of "I told you, and what now?" Her own inner monologue catalogued the small betrayals, the institutionalized blind spots, the subtle ways systems perpetuated exclusion. Reaching her office floor, she pressed the elevator button, finally able to take a breath. Yet the scene remained vivid in her mind. Officer Miller at the gate, the receptionist's hesitations, the HR rep's careful words. Every interaction, a microcosm of systemic bias. Every word, gesture, and hesitation was evidence of entrenched prejudice. Monique set her phone on the polished corner of her office desk, replaying the footage. Each frame captured not only a man in uniform, but a pattern of dismissal, of authority misapplied, of racial assumptions codified into everyday procedure. She leaned back, rain-soaked coat dripping onto the office carpet. The fight was just beginning. And she knew, with every beat of her heart, that exposing this injustice would demand strategy, endurance, and a willingness to confront both the obvious and the invisible structures that allowed such behavior to persist. Monique's office felt smaller than usual, the glass walls reflecting the storm outside and the storm inside her mind. She perched on the edge of her leather chair, phone in hand, video playback looping. Officer Miller blocking her car, rigid stance, smug expression, words dripping with authority he had no right to claim. Each frame was a testament to bias codified into behavior, a visual dossier of humiliation imposed on merit. Her assistant, Carla, hovered silently by the doorway, holding a stack of reports. "Do you want me to share this with corporate communications?" she asked cautiously, aware that the act of exposure carried risk. Monique nodded, voice tight but deliberate. "Yes. And with social media. We're not hiding this." Carla hesitated, fingers hovering over her keyboard. "It might blow up. Internally, externally. People will talk." "They should talk," Monique said sharply. "They should see what compliance looks like when prejudice masquerades as procedure." Within minutes, the video circulated internally. Messages pinged across company chat. Shock, disbelief, concern. Some colleagues typed supportive words, others left the thread silent, hesitant to align themselves publicly. Monique noticed the patterns immediately. Who offered empathy, who offered excuses, who remained neutral. Each response revealed an underlying map of power, fear, and complicity. From the corner of her office, she watched the notification stream. External social media alerts began to appear, shares, comments, initial judgments. Dialogue and commentary painted a spectrum. "This is outrageous. Maybe there's context we don't see." Finally, accountability. Monique's pulse quickened. The story was no longer hers alone. It had become a mirror reflecting systemic bias to the world. Her phone buzzed again. A senior executive called. "Monique, I've seen the video. The response is mixed. People are polarized. Some of the board members are asking for discretion." "Discretion?" she repeated, incredulous. "The discretion should have been in allowing me access, not in covering up misconduct." "But public exposure can backfire," he warned, voice low. "We need to manage this carefully." "No," Monique said firmly. "Backfire is already happening. The truth is already out. Silence and management are what uphold injustice." The executive hesitated, then conceded. "Understood. Proceed at your discretion." She ended the call, breathing sharply. This was the moment where power shifted, though unevenly. Officer Miller's authority had relied on assumed compliance, on others' unwillingness to challenge microaggressions. Now, visibility fractured that illusion. Carla approached again. "Do you want me to prepare a statement?" "Yes. Make it concise. Factual. Let the evidence speak." Monique leaned back, eyes scanning the office. Her achievements, awards, and milestones lined the walls, proof of decades of work, but none of it had shielded her from prejudice. The video, however, carried undeniable weight. Meanwhile, internal messages evolved into discussion threads. Some employees rationalized the officer's actions, citing policy, hierarchy, or fear of retribution. Others criticized the institution's failure to protect her. Dialogue, more than the video itself, revealed how systemic bias perpetuated itself in casual rationalizations and coded compliance. Monique observed silently. Every reaction was data, every comment a clue to patterns of complicity. She had faced boardroom challenges before, aggressive negotiations, and hostile takeovers, but this was different. This was personal, yet emblematic. The system itself, designed to enforce order, had become a mechanism for exclusion. Her phone buzzed with a live chat notification from a colleague in another office. Everyone's watching. What's the next move? Monique tapped the screen. We wait for the formal inquiry, document everything, and do not let intimidation silence the truth. Her tone left no room for debate. This was not retaliation, it was strategy. Exposure was merely the first step. As evening fell, the rain softened into a drizzle. Neon reflections shimmered on the pavement, distorted mirrors of the chaos she had set in motion. Outside, life went on, cars passed, pedestrians huddled under umbrellas, but the ripple she had created inside her company, and potentially beyond, was spreading fast. Her gaze returned to the video, replaying Officer Miller's rigid posture and the condescending tilt of his head. Each frame was a study in entitlement and bias. And now, unlike the quiet humiliation at the gate, the world would witness it. For the first time since the encounter, Monique allowed herself a measured exhale. The initial surge of anger had been channeled into action. Exposure was no longer a threat, it was a tool. And with it, the first cracks in the armor of institutional indifference had begun to appear. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Monique stepped inside, rain still streaking her coat, eyes sharp, posture unyielding. Around the massive oval table sat executives in crisp suits, some curious, some wary, all caught between respect and fear. The security footage of Officer Miller's blockade had circulated internally, leaving ripples of shock and uncertainty. Tonight, she would confront the inertia that allowed such bias to persist. Let's begin, Monique said, voice steady but edged with urgency. She placed her phone on the table, screen facing the room. The video played silently, looping Officer Miller's rigid stance, the condescending tilt of his head, and the subtle defiance of authority misapplied. A murmur ran around the table. One senior executive cleared his throat. Monique, this is serious. The footage is compelling, but there are protocols, chains of command. Chains of command. Monique's eyes flashed. Chains of command did nothing when my car was blocked, when my authority was ignored. Chains of command maintain systems, not justice. We cannot pretend procedure excuses prejudice. A younger board member spoke hesitantly. She's right. It's clear this is an abuse of power, but how we respond, we need to consider backlash. Investor concerns. Media attention. Monique leaned forward. Backlash. The backlash is already happening. The question is whether we will reinforce injustice or correct it. Every second we hesitate, Officer Miller's actions are normalized. Every minute we delay, our employees see compliance rewarded over courage. A legal advisor cleared his throat, fingers steepled. CEO Harris, procedurally, we must consider liability. If we act hastily, there could be claims against the company for defamation or overreach. She cut him off. Do you think the defamation is on me documenting systemic bias? Or on the officer who used his uniform to block the owner of the company? Let's not confuse morality with fear. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchanged glances, silent acknowledgement of truths they had avoided discussing. The tension in the room was palpable. Dialogue crackled with unspoken assumptions and power dynamics. Monique, we must tread carefully, said another, senior yet visibly shaken. We support you, but full exposure might escalate things beyond what HR and legal can manage. I have already documented everything, Monique replied, eyes scanning each face. We cannot control perception, only action. Our response must be swift, deliberate, and principled. The officer's behavior is not an isolated incident. It is indicative of systemic bias tolerated within hierarchical structures. The youngest board member raised a hand, hesitating. If we take action, do we risk undermining internal confidence? People might fear that any authority figure can be challenged publicly. Internal confidence. Monique's tone was cold steel. Confidence in systems that perpetuate exclusion is not confidence at all, it is compliance dressed in respectability. We are not protecting egos. We are enforcing justice. If authority can be questioned, it should be questioned when it is abused. That is the difference between leadership and tyranny. A long silence followed. The storm outside matched the storm within the room, lightning flashing briefly through the panoramic windows, rain hammering the glass, punctuating each pause. Every executive considered their position, allegiance, fear, moral clarity. Finally, the board chair spoke, voice measured but resolute. Ms. Harris, your point is undeniable. We cannot ignore this. But the officer is within the police jurisdiction. How far can the company intervene? Monique's gaze hardened. Intervention is not negotiation. Exposure is accountability. Documentation is leverage. Every official and colleague who hesitated now has the opportunity to choose justice over silence. Our authority as a company, as leaders, is measured not by comfort but by our response to injustice. That is the principle. Not compliance, not fear. The room remained tense, some nodding subtly, others frozen in contemplation. She had dismantled the illusions of deference, forcing a reckoning. Dialogue had shifted power, her voice carried not threats but clarity, cutting through ambiguity like a scalpel. A junior legal advisor muttered, almost to himself, "She's dismantling assumptions, every excuse we hold up as policy." Monique glanced at him. Yes. Because they are excuses. Every hesitation, every whispered justification, reinforces the same systems that allowed Officer Miller to act with impunity. We are not above critique. But we are above complicity. The chair cleared his throat again. Very well. We will draft a statement acknowledging the incident, initiate an internal inquiry, and coordinate with legal oversight of the external channels. Actions will be taken within the next 24 hours. Monique nodded. The words were a beginning, not a resolution. She had exposed the fracture lines, forced dialogue that could not be ignored, and held each executive accountable for their next move. Every hesitation, every word, every glance mattered. As the meeting adjourned, Monique walked to the window, rain-soaked streets reflecting neon splashes below. Her reflection mirrored a leader caught between triumph and exhaustion, authority and vulnerability. The boardroom had shifted, but the battle was far from over. She knew Officer Miller would resist, the system would obstruct, and allies might falter. Yet this confrontation had crystallized the stakes. The next moves would define both accountability and precedent. The HR office smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Monique sat stiffly in a leather chair, phone recording the surroundings for documentation. Across from her, the building manager and the HR director exchanged guarded glances, papers shuffled nervously. The formal inquiry into Officer Miller's actions was beginning, but already it carried the invisible weight of hesitation and bias. Ms. Harris, the HR director began, voice polite but taut, "We've initiated a full review. Security logs, building access, and officer reports will all be examined." Monique's hands rested on the polished table, fingers tapping lightly. "And the officer? Has he been questioned?" "Yes," the director said, adjusting her glasses. "He maintains that he was following protocol. Says he had no reason to suspect a violation of procedure." Monique's jaw tightened. Protocol, procedure, terms wielded to disguise prejudice. She had seen it in boardrooms, lobby halls, and now in HR offices. Dialogue with the director revealed the subtleties. Defensive language, cautious phrasing, the repeated insistence on neutrality. Each word, carefully chosen, attempted to absolve institutional complicity while maintaining a veneer of fairness. "And evidence?" Monique asked. "Security cameras, eyewitness accounts, everything." The building manager shifted uncomfortably. "Yes. We're compiling statements. Some staff may be reluctant, they fear retaliation or repercussions." Monique's gaze fixed on him. "Fear perpetuates injustice. Witnesses must be supported. Silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. The HR director nodded, but her eyes betrayed doubt. Monique knew the subtle calculus of institutional protection, shielding one of their own, appeasing external oversight, maintaining appearances. Officer Miller's demeanor was being preserved under a thin layer of procedural legitimacy. Later that afternoon, Officer Miller was brought into a small, windowless conference room. Monique's phone, discreetly recording, captured the interaction. His posture defensive, voice clipped, gestures minimal. "Officer Miller," the HR representative began, "we're reviewing an incident at the company entrance. You were involved. Can you describe your actions?" "I was following security protocol," he said, tone measured. "I ensured that only authorized personnel entered the premises. That is all." "Authorized personnel?" Monique's voice cut in, calm but precise. "Do you recognize the person you blocked as the CEO of this company?" The officer shifted, eyes momentarily darting toward Monique, then away. I was doing my duty. I did not know the individual. Procedure applies to everyone." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Monique said, voice cold. "Authority is not neutral when applied selectively. Your bias informed your interpretation of procedure." The HR director cleared her throat. "Ms. Harris, please let him answer." "He is answering," Monique replied. Every word exposes the systemic preference that allows discrimination to masquerade as policy. Your silence, your hesitation, enables it. Outside the conference room, whispers and murmurs spread among security staff and administrative assistants. Dialogue revealed fear, complicity, curiosity. Some acknowledged his actions quietly, others rationalized, claiming ignorance. Monique's recordings documented not only the officer but the network of institutional responses, the subtle mechanisms of support and avoidance that maintained the status quo. Hours passed. Monique reviewed the footage, notes, and preliminary statements. Every interaction, every coded gesture, underscored the structural problem. Officer Miller was not acting alone, he was operating within a framework that normalized selective authority. "Why is this taking so long?" Carla asked, watching Monique pace. "Because systems resist accountability," Monique replied. "It's not the individual alone, it's the structure. And structures are slower to yield." By evening, the HR director returned with a preliminary assessment. "Ms. Harris, initial findings show protocol violations by Officer Miller. Recommendations for disciplinary action are being drafted. We will proceed with formal reporting to local authorities and internal review boards." Monique allowed herself a brief nod. Progress, measured and cautious, but still progress. She understood, however, that exposure was only the first step. Institutional bias did not crumble under a single video or a single statement. It required relentless attention, methodical documentation, and unwavering pressure. As Monique left the HR office, the rain had stopped, leaving streets slick and reflective. Neon signage shimmered in puddles, distorted mirrors of the day's tension. She felt the weight of scrutiny, the responsibility of documenting truth in a system resistant to it, and the knowledge that the officer's eventual accountability would be a product of visibility, strategy, and persistence. Her reflection in the glass doors lingered for a moment, a leader navigating a labyrinth of procedure, prejudice, and power. The investigation had begun, but the broader battle for justice, respect, and recognition had only just unfolded. Every conversation, every recorded statement, and every internal discussion would shape the outcome. Monique knew the cost would be both emotional and professional, but the principles at stake demanded endurance beyond discomfort. The morning after the initial HR sessions, Monique returned to her office to find the atmosphere taut. Emails pinged relentlessly, messages and memos fluttering like nervous birds. Colleagues who had once offered casual nods of acknowledgement now approached with cautious smiles, weighing words before speaking. Support was uneven. Fear, loyalty, and self-preservation intermingled in ways that exposed hidden alliances and quiet betrayals. Carla entered first, setting a fresh cup of coffee on Monique's desk. "Some of the team wants to meet with you," she said. "Privately." Monique gestured toward the seating area. Bring them in. A small group of employees shuffled in, whispers accompanying their steps. One young project manager, hesitant but resolute, spoke first. Ms. Harris, we saw the video. What Officer Miller did, it's unacceptable. We want to support you. Monique nodded, eyes scanning each face. Support is not enough. Documentation matters. Names, times, statements. Silence or hesitation is complicity. Courage must be visible as well as internal. A senior analyst cleared his throat, face pale. I want to, but some colleagues told me to stay out of it. That if I speak up, I might face repercussions. Her gaze hardened. And that is exactly the problem. Fear maintains injustice. Every rationalization, every whispered warning, is a thread in the system that allowed Miller to act with impunity. You are either part of the solution or part of the structure that enforces exclusion. Some nodded quickly, others remained stiff, calculating the cost. Dialogue revealed fractured loyalty, quiet murmurs of personal concern intertwined with moral clarity. Monique catalogued each reaction, aware that this was as much about internal networks as the officer himself. Later that afternoon, a meeting with a mid-level executive revealed the first sharp sting of betrayal. Ms. Harris, I think the video might have been misinterpreted, he began cautiously. Perhaps Officer Miller was cautious, following rules. It's complicated. Complicated. Monique's voice cut through the boardroom. It is not complicated to block the CEO of her own company. It is deliberate. You know it, I know it, and silence reinforces it. Every excuse you make shields bias. The executive squirmed. I don't want to create waves. There are reputations at stake. Reputations built on fear and complicity are meaningless, Monique snapped. Integrity matters. Accountability matters. If you cannot recognize that, you have no place defending procedures over people. The room fell silent. Monique leaned back, letting the weight of her words settle. Dialogue, she realized, was a tool, both to illuminate prejudice and to measure courage. Allies revealed themselves in affirmation. Betrayers exposed themselves in rationalization. Each exchange sharpened the moral map of her organization. Carla returned later, looking unsettled. Some staffers are refusing interviews with HR. Others are circulating counter-narratives, claiming the video was staged or taken out of context. Monique's lips pressed into a thin line. Of course they are. Denial is easier than accountability. But documentation is undeniable. Evidence is unassailable. Keep records. Names. Statements. Every detail matters. By evening, she convened a smaller, more trusted group in her office. Dialogue shifted from fear and hesitation to strategy and solidarity. We proceed carefully, she said. Transparency is our shield, evidence is our weapon, and truth is our compass. Betrayal is inevitable. Do not let it paralyze you. Let it clarify who stands with justice. The group absorbed her words in quiet reverence. Some nodded, their loyalty solidified, while others remained wary, calculating the cost of open alignment. Monique understood both reactions. Systemic prejudice was reinforced by subtle acts of self-preservation, just as easily as it was dismantled by courage. Later, she reviewed the footage once again. Officer Miller's stance, the subtle microaggressions, and the web of institutional reactions were all captured. Moments of complicity, hesitation, and outright rationalization. The betrayal was painful, yet illuminating. It showed not only the depth of prejudice but also the pathways to accountability. Monique leaned back in her chair, rain fading into the city evening beyond her window. Allies and betrayers were revealed in the same breath, but clarity was a kind of power. She would use it deliberately. The fight was no longer isolated. It was systemic, exposing the patterns of bias that ran through her company and echoed beyond its walls. Dialogue, she reminded herself, was both weapon and mirror. It would uncover truth, even if truth was uncomfortable for those who preferred silence. The courthouse loomed ahead, austere and indifferent, stone columns rising like silent sentinels. Monique's heels clicked against the wet steps, echoing sharply in the chill morning air. Inside, the air smelled of paper, polished wood, and faint antiseptic. She carried only her briefcase, but every document inside was a chronicle of injustice, every frame of video a record of abuse. Today, Officer Miller would face the formal reckoning that had been long delayed. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and legal staff. Monique took her seat, scanning the room. The officer, rigid in his uniform, exuded quiet confidence, the kind born from believing the system protected him. Lawyers whispered strategies, papers rustled, and the hum of fluorescent lights added a sterile rhythm to the tension. "Ms. Harris," said her attorney, voice low, "remember, testify to what you saw, what you experienced. Keep it factual, clear, concise." Monique nodded, heart steady despite the storm of emotion beneath the surface. She had rehearsed this moment countless times. Her voice, when raised, would carry decades of authority and the weight of systemic injustice. The judge called the case to order. Officer Miller's lawyer attempted procedural defenses, framing his actions as protocol, his judgment guided by policy, not prejudice. Dialogue flowed, fast and precise, an intricate dance of language meant to obscure intent. Then it was Monique's turn. She stood, voice clear, commanding attention without demanding it. "I arrived at Harris Global last evening," she began. "My vehicle was blocked by Officer Miller at the main entrance. He refused to acknowledge my identity as CEO and owner of the company, claiming rules applied equally, yet selectively enforcing them. I recorded the encounter to ensure documentation of actions taken against me without cause. His words, his posture, his decisions reflect both personal bias and systemic tolerance for discrimination." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled notes, the officer's jaw tightened. Cross-examination followed, questions designed to chip away at her credibility. Was the video edited? Were there other factors influencing the encounter? Could her interpretation be subjective? Monique answered each carefully. The video is continuous. Security logs corroborate timing and location. No other context justifies being denied entry to the company one owns. The facts are not subjective. The officer testified next. His voice was clipped, formal. "I followed security protocol. I could not verify identity. I ensured compliance." Compliance at whose expense? Monique interjected quietly when given the opportunity. Authority without accountability is oppression. Enforcement without discernment is injustice. The judge paused, pen hovering over notes, absorbing the tension in the room. Dialogue between lawyers escalated, probing definitions, challenging recollections, highlighting procedure versus ethics. Monique watched, recording in her mind not only the overt bias but the subtle defenses, how language and hierarchy protected prejudice. Outside, news crews murmured, live feeds capturing snippets of testimony. Public exposure amplified the stakes. The officer's actions, once small and localized, were now under scrutiny by the law, the media, and society. Witnesses from the company provided corroborating statements. Dialogue revealed fear and hesitation, rationalizations, and eventual courage. Each account fortified Monique's testimony, creating a latticework of evidence against the officer. Hours passed. The courtroom's rhythm, questions, answers, objections, felt like a war of words. Monique's voice remained calm, measured, cutting through legal maneuvering with precision. She recounted not only the encounter but the broader implications. Systemic bias, subtle enforcement of authority against marginalized individuals, and the culture of compliance that allowed abuse to flourish. By late afternoon, the judge leaned forward, voice deliberate. The court recognizes the severity of documented bias and procedural misuse. This case will proceed to formal review, with consequences evaluated in accordance with institutional and legal standards. Monique exhaled, tension easing slightly. The courtroom had acknowledged the pattern, if not yet delivered punishment. Her testimony had transformed a single act of exclusion into a documented challenge to structural injustice. Dialogue had revealed motives, rationalizations, and defenses, exposing the network of protection around the officer. As she left the courtroom, the rain had softened outside, puddles reflecting fractured neon light. Colleagues approached quietly, nodding in subtle solidarity. Some remained hesitant, still calculating personal risk. Others offered genuine support. Every interaction reinforced the truth she had been fighting to expose. Accountability required courage, persistence, and strategy. The officer walked past her, eyes meeting hers briefly, the first flicker of uncertainty in a posture that had once radiated invulnerability. Monique knew the journey was far from over. Formal judgment would take time, but a critical step had been taken. Exposure, testimony, and documented dialogue had begun to tilt power toward accountability. The city had grown quiet by evening, rain-soaked streets reflecting the orange glow of streetlights. Inside Harris Global, Monique's office buzzed with controlled energy. Her phone pinged continuously, emails, social media notifications, and internal chat alerts, all carrying one message. The incident was now unavoidable. The story had spread beyond internal corridors to public scrutiny, and Officer Miller's authority was fracturing under the weight of exposure. Carla entered, holding a tablet. Ms. Harris, external coverage is increasing. News outlets are reporting on the standoff, security footage is circulating widely, and the social media response is intense. Public opinion is heavily in your favor. Monique didn't smile. Favor was transient, accountability was the goal. Keep monitoring all platforms. Document everything. Public sentiment is leverage, but evidence is permanent. The board convened again. Dialogue was tense but shifting. The executives who had hesitated before now spoke with measured deference. The exposure has made internal follow-ups unavoidable, one acknowledged. We need formal acknowledgement and transparent communication. Monique's voice carried authority, cutting through hesitation. Recognition without action is meaningless. Public attention amplifies responsibility, not absolves it. Every step taken must be documented, and every internal measure must address not only the individual but the system that enabled the behavior. Legal teams had begun contacting external oversight authorities. Officer Miller's lawyers attempted procedural obfuscation, citing jurisdictional boundaries and technicalities. Monique remained unflinching. Dialogue, in this instance, became the tool to dismantle narrative control. Every statement she made, every pointed question she asked, challenged pretense and exposed weakness. In a private conference room, Carla relayed messages from sympathetic colleagues. Many staffers are now willing to testify, some even against prior caution. The fear that inhibited them has shifted into clarity. Exposure has empowered them. Monique nodded. Empowerment, however, carried responsibility. Every statement must be precise, corroborated, and documented. Exposure alone is insufficient. Evidence is not optional, it is unavoidable if we want accountability. Meanwhile, Officer Miller's posture had visibly changed. The once rigid stance, rooted in assumed impunity, now trembled under scrutiny. Conversations between his peers revealed unease, defensive rationalizations, and whispered acknowledgments of impropriety. Dialogue exposed cracks in the network that had once shielded him. Colleagues questioning loyalty, legal advisors debating the optics of continued defense, and HR cautiously aligning with transparency to avoid institutional damage. Monique's phone buzzed with another alert. A news outlet had requested an interview. She considered the implications. Every word broadcasted would carry weight beyond the company walls. Prepare talking points, she instructed Carla. Focus on facts. Highlight systemic bias. Avoid conjecture. Let the evidence shape the narrative. By late evening, Monique convened her closest team for strategic planning. We have shifted the momentum, she said. The officer's authority is undermined. Institutional complacency is now under scrutiny. But the fight is not over. We must anticipate resistance, deflection, and attempts to rewrite history. Every document, every recorded statement, every internal message is a tool. And we will use them. Dialogue within the team was direct and focused. No platitudes, no hedging. Every instruction was tactical. who to interview, which internal records to secure, how to coordinate with legal oversight. Each conversation built a map of action, an arsenal of accountability. Outside, neon lights shimmered in puddles. Rain had left a lingering chill, a reminder of the tension that had begun hours earlier at the company gate. Monique gazed through the glass, reflecting on the journey so far. The officer's arrogance, once unshakable, now wavered. The system that had enabled him was no longer indifferent. Visibility had shifted the balance. Monique allowed herself a brief acknowledgement of progress. Not relief, not triumph, those were premature, but clarity. Exposure, strategic documentation, and unflinching confrontation had begun to turn the tide. The abuser's power, once absolute in the microcosm of that rainy night, was now tenuous. Her reflection in the glass merged with the cityscape beyond, fractured neon, shifting shadows, and wet streets that mirrored both turmoil and possibility. Dialogue, evidence, and persistent strategy had moved her from isolated confrontation to institutional accountability. The path ahead was still arduous, but each carefully measured step ensured that the officer's authority could no longer operate unchecked. Monique exhaled slowly. The first fractures were visible, and in the quiet, tense glow of evening, she recognized the power of clarity, courage, and relentless pursuit of justice. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the faint hum of overhead lights. Officer Miller sat rigidly, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, eyes darting occasionally toward Monique, who remained calm, composed, and unwavering. The months of exposure, investigation, and public scrutiny had stripped him of the aura of authority he once wielded effortlessly. Now, he faced not just legal consequences, but the undeniable weight of systemic accountability. "Order in the court," the judge intoned. "We will hear closing statements." Monique's attorney spoke first, laying out a meticulous account of the officer's misconduct, refusal to recognize the CEO's authority, selective enforcement of procedure, and the broader implications of institutional bias. Dialogue between lawyers emphasized legal nuance, procedural violations, and ethical responsibility, all underscored by Monique's recorded evidence and testimony. When it was Monique's turn, she rose, voice steady, eyes locked on the court. "This case is not merely about a single officer's actions," she said. "It is about a system that tolerates exclusion, rationalizes bias, and permits authority to operate unchecked when convenience or prejudice aligns with it. Officer Miller's behavior is symptomatic, not isolated. Accountability must be structural, as well as individual." Her words carried through the courtroom with precision, punctuated by the subtle shuffling of papers, the clicks of pens, and the tense murmurs of spectators. She recounted each moment, each gesture, and each interaction. The officer blocking her vehicle, the coded microaggressions, the hesitation of staff, and the culture of compliance that allowed the act to occur. Officer Miller's lawyer attempted procedural defenses, citing protocol adherence and chain-of-command reasoning. Monique's rebuttal was precise, factual, and unwavering. Dialogue highlighted how procedural justification could be weaponized to conceal prejudice, and how courage, documentation, and persistence were the mechanisms by which injustice could be exposed. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Harris, your testimony has been detailed and corroborated. Your documentation is thorough. Officer Miller, do you have any response to the evidence presented?" The officer's voice wavered, formal but defensive. "I was following security guidelines. I did not intend." Monique's gaze did not flinch. Intent does not erase impact. Authority exercised with bias, regardless of intent, harms individuals and undermines the integrity of the institution. Silence and inaction compound that harm. Witnesses from the company, previously hesitant, now provided statements confirming the officer's actions, the reactions of colleagues, and the subtle ways institutional structures had initially shielded him. Dialogue between witnesses and attorneys further illuminated systemic failings, showing not just the isolated act, but the patterns of behavior that permitted it. Outside, media coverage amplified the courtroom proceedings. The public narrative now reflected systemic accountability rather than personal conflict. Officer Miller, once shielded by assumed authority, faced tangible consequences. formal reprimand, internal suspension, and scrutiny from external oversight authorities. By late afternoon, the judge delivered a preliminary acknowledgement of misconduct, noting procedural violations and systemic failures. Officer Miller's authority had been diminished, both legally and publicly. Dialogue within the courtroom underscored the shift. Counsel debated procedural rectifications, internal review boards planned oversight measures, and the officer's colleagues no longer defended him. Monique exhaled, her body tense from months of strategy, confrontation, and observation. The officer's downfall was not a victory of ego, but the result of clarity, evidence, and relentless pursuit of justice. Accountability had been achieved through systemic exposure, precise documentation, and unwavering insistence on principle. Returning to Harris Global, Monique walked through the lobby with measured steps. Colleagues approached with subtle nods, some cautiously supportive, others quietly realigning themselves to the emerging new normal. She observed the patterns: who had resisted, who had facilitated, and who had chosen courage over convenience. Dialogue, once hesitant, now reflected awareness and responsibility. Monique paused at her office window, overlooking wet streets shimmering with city lights. The battle had reached a pivotal stage, but the emotional cost was evident. Trust had been tested, fear had been confronted, and alliances both true and false had been revealed. Structural change was underway, yet the weight of the confrontation lingered. She allowed herself a brief reflection. The officer had been held accountable, systemic bias exposed, and courage validated. Yet, she also recognized the scars, emotional, professional, and institutional, that such confrontations always leave. Justice had been served, but the work of vigilance, awareness, and ongoing reform remained. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Monique's office, illuminating the polished surfaces and awards lining the walls. She stood quietly, reviewing the final reports from HR and legal, each page a chronicle of meticulous accountability. Officer Miller's actions had been formally documented, disciplinary measures enforced, and systemic lapses identified with actionable solutions. Justice, slow but inevitable, had arrived. Carla entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. The board has approved the final measures. Officer Miller's suspension is effective immediately, and internal protocols have been revised to prevent similar incidents. Public statements have been released, and the media coverage is overwhelmingly supportive. Monique accepted her cup, nodding thoughtfully. It's not about support. It's about accountability. In the company cafeteria, whispers of the events filtered through conversations. Employees who had once hesitated now spoke openly, sharing perspectives and experiences that had previously been muted. Dialogue revealed a transformation. Fear gave way to clarity, hesitation to resolve, silence to documented witness. Monique observed quietly, noting patterns, acknowledging courage, and cataloguing those who had acted with integrity. A meeting with the board followed, more subdued than previous sessions. Executives who had once rationalized or delayed now listened attentively. The changes implemented are significant, Monique said. But the true test will be the culture. Policies alone cannot prevent prejudice. Vigilance, accountability, and transparency must be continuous. Every interaction, every decision, is a measure of institutional integrity. The media continued to amplify the story. Headlines highlighted accountability and systemic reform, but Monique remained focused on the tangible internal work. External approval was fleeting. Structural change was enduring. Officer Miller, once confident in his authority, now faced the consequences of selective enforcement, suspension, professional scrutiny, and reputational damage. The poetic justice was not immediate satisfaction, but the precise realignment of accountability and authority. Later, Monique convened her team in her office. Dialogue was deliberate, strategic, and reflective. Every step we took mattered, she said. Documentation, exposure, confrontation, and relentless follow-through ensured that bias could not remain unchecked. But understand this: systemic change is ongoing. Complacency is the enemy. Courage must be reinforced at every level. Carla spoke softly. Do you think Officer Miller will learn? Monique's eyes narrowed slightly. Perhaps. But learning is secondary. Accountability is primary. The system now recognizes the consequences of selective authority. That recognition, enforced through documented evidence and procedural rectification, is the true lesson. The day progressed with a subtle shift in the company's energy. Employees engaged with renewed awareness. Dialogue was more open, questions more candid, and interactions more equitable. Monique's presence, no longer challenged, carried authority reinforced not only by position but by the principled navigation of injustice. By evening, she stood alone at her office window, city lights reflected in her eyes. Rain had returned, light at first, washing streets and creating distorted reflections. She allowed herself a moment of stillness, absorbing both the professional triumph and the emotional toll of months of confrontation, documentation, and strategic exposure. Justice had been enacted, yet the scars of systemic bias lingered, not only in the institution, but in the subtle memories of humiliation, fear, and endurance. The poetic justice was complete, the officer stripped of unchecked authority, colleagues held to moral accountability, and institutional reform cemented. Yet Monique understood the duality. Triumph carried weight, and victory exacted emotional cost. She had exposed bias, demanded accountability, and enforced structural reform. Dialogue, documentation, and persistent action had dismantled the shield of assumed power. As the city lights shimmered in puddles below, Monique turned back to her desk, reviewing notes and planning next steps. The battle against prejudice, bias, and selective authority would continue, but the framework for accountability was now stronger, clearer, and visible to all. Every conversation, every record, and every act of courage contributed to a new precedent. Systemic injustice could no longer operate unchecked, and power exercised with prejudice would face tangible consequences. She placed her hands on the polished surface of her desk, feeling the weight of responsibility and clarity. The journey had been arduous, fraught with fear, betrayal, and confrontation, but the outcome validated persistence, strategy, and principled action. Authority, once abused, was now measured. Bias, once hidden, was now exposed. Justice, slow and deliberate, had found its course.